There is a specific kind of exhaustion that only comes from dealing with a family that treats life like a reality television show. For 30 years, I was the involuntary cameraman in my family's drama. My name is Julian. I don't have a multi-billion-dollar tech startup, and I didn't stumble into a massive inheritance. I am a landscape designer. I design urban green spaces, rooftop gardens, and minimalist courtyards in the city. It's a good living, a peaceful living, and it pays for a very comfortable life. But more importantly, it requires patience. You have to understand how roots grow, how soil shifts, and exactly how much pressure a structure can take before it collapses. It turns out that exact same logic applies to people, especially to my older brother, Leo. Leo was the family's golden child, but not for any actual achievements. He was the golden child because he was loud, charismatic, and possessed a terrifying ability to make his absolute failures look like tragic, heroic stumbles. If Leo crashed his car, it wasn't because he was speeding, it was because the universe was testing him. If Leo lost a job, it was because the manager was threatened by his vision, and my parents, Arthur and Martha, bought into it completely. They didn't hate me, they were just entirely consumed by him. I was the reliable, quiet son who paid his own bills. Leo was the delicate, brilliant bird who needed constant feeding. The real trouble started when our grandfather, Arthur Sr., passed away. Grandpa was the only truly grounded person in our family line. He was a retired stonemason who, back in the late 1960s, had the foresight to buy a massive 4-story historic brownstone in one of the city's most desirable historic districts. Over the decades, as the city gentrified around it, that brownstone became worth a literal fortune. It featured hand-carved molding, a private cobblestone courtyard, and enough square footage to house 3 separate families. When Grandpa passed, his will was simple. He left the brownstone to Leo and me, 50-50. The sole condition was that we had to maintain the property together, preserving it as a family legacy. To me, that house was a sanctuary of memories. To Leo and his newlywed wife Sienna, it was a jackpot. Sienna was a lifestyle blogger. She was the kind of person who didn't experience a moment unless it was framed in a 16:9 aspect ratio with a flattering filter. The moment the funeral director handed us the keys, Sienna didn't mourn. She started pacing the hallways of the brownstone, talking about content curation, natural lighting, and how they could transform the entire second floor into a walk-in wardrobe for her brand partnerships. Within 3 months of moving into our respective floors, the passive-aggressive campaign began. It started with the utility bills. Leo would forget his half of the structural insurance. Then, Sienna began complaining to my parents that my presence in the building was disrupting her business. She told my mother that my muddy work boots in the main foyer were ruining the aesthetic value of the property and making her look unprofessional to her followers. Soon, my parents called me over for Sunday dinner at their suburban home. The atmosphere was thick with manufactured guilt. "Julian, honey," my mother started, wringing her hands as if she were delivering news of a terminal illness. "Leo and Sienna are trying so hard to build something beautiful. Sienna's career is really taking off, but she needs space. The stress of sharing the property is making Leo's anxiety flare up. You know how sensitive his stomach gets when he's stressed. I pay 60% of the upkeep on that house, Mom," I said calmly, cutting into my chicken. "Leo hasn't contributed to the property tax fund since last November." My father sighed, rubbing his temples. "Julian, be reasonable. You have your own little plant shop. You can live anywhere. Leo needs this house to project an image. In his line of work, image is everything. Don't be selfish. We are just worried the stress of you two bickering is going to ruin your brother's marriage." It was a classic play. They weren't kicking me out. They were begging me to sacrifice myself so they wouldn't have to deal with Leo's inevitable tantrums. They wanted me to hand over my peace so they could keep pretending their golden boy was winning at life. I looked at my parents. I looked at the exhaustion in their eyes, an exhaustion caused entirely by their own enabling behavior. And right then, I made a decision that shocked them. "Okay," I said. My father blinked. "Okay? You'll think about it?" "No," I said, setting my fork down. "I'll sign my half over to Leo. I'll take a standard buyout based on the tax assessment from 3 years ago, not the current market value. I'll make it cheap for him. But on one condition. Once the paperwork is signed, I am out. Do not call me about maintenance, do not call me about leaky pipes, and do not call me to mediate his life." They practically tripped over themselves to agree. They thought they had pulled off the ultimate heist. Leo and Sienna thought they had successfully bullied the quiet brother out of a multi-million-dollar asset for pennies on the dollar. What they didn't understand is that I wasn't losing. I was buying my freedom. I packed my bags, moved into a sleek, sunlit industrial loft closer to my downtown boutique, and completely cut down my communication with them to polite, brief text messages on holidays. For 2 years, I enjoyed absolute, uninterrupted silence. And while I was cultivating my peace, Leo and Sienna were busy digging their own grave. If you watch a house from the outside, you can usually tell when the foundation is rotting. You don't even need to go into the basement. You just have to watch the alignment of the windows and the way the doors start to stick. For 2 years, I didn't see my family, but I saw them everywhere. Sienna's social media blew up. She rebranded her account to The Historic Housewife. Every single day, there were videos of her and Leo living a life of absolute, obscene luxury inside my grandfather's brownstone. They put down imported Italian marble over the original hardwood floors. They installed a commercial-grade espresso bar in the kitchen. They threw lavish, themed cocktail parties for the city's minor influencers, local politicians, and high-society neighbors. To the untrained eye, Leo was a massive success. He wore tailored suits, drove a brand-new German sports car, and walked around the neighborhood with the air of a man who owned the block. But I know how much it costs to maintain an 1890s brownstone. I know what the property taxes are in that district. And I knew for an absolute fact that Leo's actual job, working as a mid-level independent marketing consultant, didn't bring in enough revenue to cover the interest on their credit cards, let alone their lifestyle. The first real crack in their foundation appeared about 18 months after I left. I was sitting in my boutique office on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. It was my father. His voice didn't have the confident, patronizing tone he used when he asked me to leave the brownstone. He sounded small, trembling. "Julian," he said, clearing his throat. "Hey, son, just checking in, seeing how the business is going." "Business is great, Dad," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Just finished a rooftop garden contract for a new hotel downtown. What's up?" "Well, I was just wondering. I know you've been doing well, and you don't really have many expenses since you're renting that loft. Leo is in a bit of a temporary cash crunch. A client backed out of a major contract. It's a completely unpredictable market anomaly, you understand. He just needs about $25,000 to bridge the gap for the property insurance and some historical district compliance fees. I was thinking, since you got that buyout money a couple of years ago," I almost laughed out loud. "Dad, what did I say to you at the dinner table before I signed the papers?" There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. "You said not to call you about his life," my father muttered. "Exactly. Leo owns 100% of that asset. If he can't afford the maintenance, he can sell it, downsize, and live within his means. Do not call me for a single dollar." "Julian, he's your brother. He could lose his standing in the community." "Then I guess he should start sitting down," I said, and gently hung up the phone. I knew that $25,000 wasn't for insurance. I did a little digging through a friend of mine who works in the local commercial real estate scene. The rumors were already swirling. Leo hadn't lost a client. Leo had developed a massive, high-stakes gambling habit. He was spending his weekends at a private underground casino downtown, trying to double his money to fund Sienna's digital fantasy life. And he was losing horribly. A month later, I decided to pull the public title registry for my grandfather's brownstone. As a registered business owner and property investor, I have access to county records. I wanted to see exactly how deep Leo was digging his hole. What I found made my blood run entirely cold. Leo hadn't just taken out a standard bank loan. A standard bank wouldn't touch him because his debt-to-income ratio was already catastrophic. Instead, Leo had gone to a private, secondary predatory lending firm called Vanguard Holdings. They specialize in high-interest, short-term loans secured against high-value real estate. Leo had taken out a second mortgage on the historic brownstone for a staggering $450,000. But that wasn't the worst part. As I scrolled down to the digital signatures on the loan agreement, I saw 4 names: Leo, Sienna, and Arthur and Martha. My brother had convinced my elderly parents to sign on as co-guarantors for the loan. He had put their retirement savings, their credit, and their own suburban home on the line to secure his gambling debts. I sat in my dark office for a long time, staring at the glowing computer screen. The sheer malice of what Leo and Sienna had done was breathtaking. They knew they were sinking, so they pulled my parents down into the whirlpool with them, entirely relying on the fact that the family would never allow a public scandal. They thought they were untouchable because they were the chosen ones. I closed the laptop. I could have called my parents. I could have stormed over there, screamed, and exposed the whole thing. But I knew exactly what would happen. Leo would cry, Sienna would make a video about family persecution, and my parents would turn on me, blaming me for causing drama and ruining their health with stress. They would find a way to justify it. No, if you want to eliminate a weed permanently, you don't just chop off the leaves. You wait for the right season, you let the soil dry out, and you pull it out by the very root. I called my corporate attorney, a sharp, brilliant woman named Sarah who handles my business acquisitions. Sarah, I said, I need you to contact Vanguard Holdings. They have a high-risk debt note on a property in the historic district. The debtor is severely delinquent on their payments, and the firm is likely preparing for a quiet foreclosure sale of the note. I want to buy that debt, anonymously, through my corporate LLC. Sarah paused on the phone. Julian, that's a toxic asset. Why would you buy a predatory loan that's already defaulting? Because, I smiled into the receiver, I'm not looking for a return on investment. I'm looking for ownership. Within 3 weeks, the paperwork was finalized. I used a substantial portion of my business reserves and took out a highly structured commercial bridge loan against my boutique's future earnings. To Vanguard Holdings, I was just a nameless, faceless corporate entity taking a bad debt off their books for 70 cents on the dollar. On paper, I was no longer just Leo's estranged younger brother. I was his mortgage holder, I was his lender, and legally, I was his landlord. 2 months later, the trap was fully set. Leo hadn't made a single payment on the debt in 90 days. The interest was compounding daily, and under the strict terms of the predatory note he had signed, the lender had the right to declare immediate default and trigger an expedited foreclosure and eviction process without going through a lengthy court battle. I held the trigger in my hand. I just needed the right moment to pull it. Then, out of nowhere, I received a beautifully embossed gold foil invitation in my mailbox. It was an invitation to a grand family reunion and gender reveal gala at the historic brownstone. Sienna was pregnant with their first child. The invitation was ostentatious, featuring a custom monogram of their initials and a dress code, urban elegance, all-white attire. Sienna had turned her pregnancy into the ultimate marketing event. She had invited over 70 people, including high society neighbors, prominent local business owners, city influencers, and our entire extended family of aunts, uncles, and cousins from out of town. It was designed to be the definitive declaration that Leo and Sienna were the undisputed kings of the family social circle. A few hours after the invitation arrived, my mother called me. She sounded ecstatic, completely oblivious to the fact that her name was on a defaulting $450,000 loan. "Julian, tell me you got the invitation," she gushed. "A baby boy! Leo is going to have a son to carry on the family name. We are finally bringing the whole family back together under Grandpa's roof. Please tell me you're coming. It would mean the world to Leo." "I'll be there, Mom," I said, keeping my voice smooth and relaxed. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. In fact, tell Leo I'm bringing a very special, significant gift. Something to help them start this new chapter of their lives completely fresh." "Oh, Julian, I knew you'd come around. I always told your father you had a good heart. Family is everything, honey." "It certainly is, Mom. See you on Saturday." The next few days were a blur of preparation. I didn't buy a baby stroller or a silver rattle. Instead, I spent my time in Sarah's law office, ensuring every single legal document was flawlessly executed, stamped by the city registry, and sealed in an official, heavy-duty legal envelope. On the afternoon of the gala, the weather in the city was perfect. The sun was setting over the historic district, casting a warm, golden glow across the brick facades. I dressed in the required all-white attire, a tailored linen suit that made me look completely at ease. I drove down to my grandfather's brownstone. As I parked, I could hear the music floating out from the open windows of the second floor. The courtyard was lined with expensive rental floral arrangements. Valet drivers were parking luxury vehicles. I walked up the stone steps, the steps I used to sweep when I lived here, carrying a large, beautifully wrapped gift box. It was covered in matte black paper with a thick, gold silk ribbon. It looked expensive, heavy, and mysterious. The moment I stepped into the grand parlor, the room was packed. People were sipping champagne, laughing, and admire the opulent renovations Leo and Sienna had done with stolen money. My mother spotted me instantly and hurried over, hugging me tightly. "You look wonderful, Julian. And look at that box. What on earth did you get them?" "You'll see, Mom." Where's the man of the hour? Leo was standing near the grand staircase, surrounded by a group of local developers and neighborhood board members. He was holding a glass of scotch, laughing loudly, his arm around Sienna, whose small baby bump was highlighted by a tight designer dress. When Leo saw me approach, his posture stiffened for a fraction of a second before he flashed his trademark million-dollar smile. "Julian!" Leo shouted, stepping forward and clapping a hand on my shoulder. "The prodigal brother returns. Look at you, man. Loving the suit. I heard you've been doing some little landscaping projects around town. Good for you, little bro. Glad you could make it to the big leagues tonight." The condescension was dripping from every word. He wanted everyone in his circle to know that I was just the small-time younger brother who was allowed to attend his grand court. "Congratulations, Leo. Congratulations, Sienna," I said, shaking his hand firmly. "I brought a gift. A very substantial one. In fact, I'd like you to open it now before the main event. I think it's important for everyone here to see exactly what kind of future you're building." Sienna's eyes lit up at the mention of a public spectacle. She immediately smelled an opportunity for a wholesome family content moment. "Oh, Julian, that is so sweet," Sienna chimed in, her voice raising to catch the attention of the crowd. "Everyone, attention please. My brother-in-law Julian has brought us a special surprise gift. Leo, let's open it right here on the stairs so everyone can see." The crowd murmured with excitement. People began circling around the base of the grand staircase. Influencers pulled out their phones, their ring lights casting a bright glare over us. My parents stood right at the front, beaming with pride, thinking this was the moment the family finally healed. I handed the heavy black box to Leo. He smiled at the cameras, hoisted it up, and began tearing away the matte black paper. Leo pulled off the lid of the box. Inside, resting on top of a bed of black silk, was not a luxury baby item. It was a thick, legal-sized, bright red folder. Leo's smile faltered. He reached into the box and pulled out the folder, his brow furrowing. "What is this? Some kind of joke? Is this a savings bond or something?" "Open it, Leo," I said, my voice dropping its warm tone entirely. It was cold, steady, and loud enough to carry across the silent, crowded room. "Read the first page out loud. For the guests." Sienna leaned over his shoulder, her camera-ready smile twisting into a scowl. "Julian, what is this? This isn't funny. We're in the middle of an event." Leo opened the folder. The first page was a certified copy of the deed of trust from Vanguard Holdings. Stamped across the top in massive, bold black letters were the words, "Notice of acceleration, default, and immediate foreclosure." I watched the color completely drain from my brother's face. It was an incredible sight. He went from a flush, arrogant pink to a pasty, sickly gray in a matter of 3 seconds. His hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled in the quiet room. "Leo?" my mother asked, her voice tight with sudden panic. "What is that? What does it say?" Leo didn't answer. He couldn't speak. His throat had completely closed up. "I'll read it for him," I said, stepping up one tier of the staircase so I was looking down at him. I turned slightly to face the crowd, including the wealthy neighbors and business owners who were watching with wide eyes. 2 years ago, my brother Leo and his wife Sienna decided they needed this house to prove to the world how successful they were. So they manipulated our parents, bought me out, and took over. But a lifestyle built on a lie is very expensive to maintain. When Leo's gambling debts caught up to him, he didn't swallow his pride. Instead, he took out a predatory loan for $450,000 against this very house. A collective gasp echoed through the room. My aunts and uncles looked at each other in absolute horror. "Julian, stop this," my father roared, stepping forward, his face red. "This is family business. You don't do this here." "Oh, it gets better, Dad," I said, looking directly at my father. "Leo didn't just risk his own neck. Leo forged your signatures as co-guarantors on that loan agreement. He put your retirement account and your suburban home on the line to fund his poker nights and Sienna's designer wardrobe. The bank was prepared to seize your house next Tuesday, Dad. You were going to be homeless because of your golden boy." My mother's hand flew to her mouth. She looked at Leo, her eyes wild with terror. "Leo, tell me it's not true. Tell me he's lying." Leo didn't deny it. He just stared at the floor, his chest heaving, the papers trembling in his hands. Sienna was fiercely whispering to him, her face twisted in rage, trying to find a way to spin the situation, but the sheer weight of the truth had completely crushed them. "But here is the real gift," I continued, turning back to Leo. "You haven't paid a single cent on that debt in 90 days. The lending firm sold the note, and the company that bought it, The company that currently owns the mortgage, the deed, and every single brick of this brownstone is an LLC owned entirely by me. The room went dead silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning unit. Leo finally looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot, filled with a mixture of hatred and absolute desperation. "Julian, please. We're family. You can't do this. Sienna is pregnant. We have a baby coming. You can't ruin us in front of everyone." "You ruined yourself, Leo. You thought you could treat everyone around you like a stepping stone for your fantasy life. You thought you could steal my peace, endanger our parents' survival, and face zero consequences because you're the special one." I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out a second, smaller document. I slapped it right on top of the red folder in his hands. "That is an official notice of eviction," I said clearly. "Under the emergency default clauses of the note you signed, you have exactly 48 hours to pack your designer clothes, your cameras, and your lies, and clear out of my grandfather's house. If you are not gone by Monday morning at 9 o'clock, the city marshals will remove you and your belongings from the premises." "Julian," my mother sobbed, grabbing my arm. "Please, he's your brother. Where are they supposed to go? What about the baby?" I looked down at my mother. I felt a pang of sadness for her, but no guilt. This was the harvest of the seeds she had planted over 30 years of enabling a monster. "They can rent a small, modest apartment within their actual budget, Mom," I said gently, "just like normal people do." I looked at my father, who looked older than he ever had, completely shattered by the revelation of Leo's betrayal. "As for you and Mom, Dad, the loan is canceled. I have legally dissolved your names from the debt structure. Your house is safe. Your retirement is safe. But you will never sign a piece of paper for him again." My father slowly nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at Leo. I turned back to the crowd of guests, many of whom were already quietly whispering, putting away their phones, and looking for the nearest exit to escape the secondary embarrassment of the public downfall. "Thank you all for coming," I said with a polite, calm smile. "The catering is paid for, so please enjoy the champagne, but the party is officially over." I didn't wait for the screaming to start. I didn't stay to watch Sienna throw a tantrum or to listen to Leo beg for mercy. I turned around, walked down the grand staircase, through the shocked crowd, and out into the crisp evening air. As I walked out into the courtyard, I felt lighter than I had in years. It wasn't the petty joy of revenge. It was the profound satisfaction of structural balance. The weight had finally been shifted back onto the shoulders of the people who deserved to carry it. Before I even reached my car, I pulled out my phone. I went to my contact list, selected Leo's name, and clicked block. Then I did the same for Sienna. The next 48 hours were an absolute circus, according to my extended family. Leo tried to call me from 3 different burner phones, but my assistant at the boutique filtered every single call. Sienna tried to post a video about a cruel family eviction, but several high society neighbors who had been at the gala left comments detailing Leo's gambling debts and the forged signatures, forcing her to take the video down within an hour out of absolute shame. His reputation in the city's elite social circles was permanently, completely incinerated. On Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock, I arrived at the brownstone with a commercial locksmith and a team of movers. Leo and Sienna were standing on the curb. They had several mismatched suitcases and cardboard boxes stacked around them. Leo looked broken, his expensive tailored suit replaced by a wrinkled sweatshirt. Sienna was crying, staring at her phone, realizing her digital empire had collapsed into dust. Leo looked at me as I walked up the steps. "You really hate me that much?" he muttered. I stopped and looked at him. "I don't hate you at all, Leo. To hate you, I'd have to care about what you do. I just wanted my grandfather's house back, and I wanted my peace." He didn't say another word. He grabbed 2 suitcases, and he and Sienna walked down the street toward a waiting rideshare car, leaving the neighborhood they had tried so hard to dominate. I walked inside the brownstone. The marble floors they had installed were cold, but the structure of the building was still solid. A month later, I made a final adjustment. I didn't sell the brownstone, and I didn't move into the grand upper floors myself. Instead, I renovated the beautiful ground floor apartment, the one with direct access to the quiet cobblestone courtyard, and I moved my parents into it. They had sold their large suburban home to completely sever themselves from any remaining financial ties to Leo's past mistakes. They needed a place to live out their retirement, a place where they could be looked after without being drained. They live there now, rent-free. They take care of the small garden I designed for them in the courtyard. We don't talk about Leo. We don't talk about the past. My parents finally look at me not as the reliable son they can ignore, but as the structural pillar that kept their entire world from collapsing. As for me, I still live in my city loft. I still run my plant boutique. Every Sunday, I walk over to the brownstone, sit in the courtyard, and watch the ivy slowly climb up the old brick walls. It takes time for roots to take hold, and it takes time for a structure to find its true alignment. But once the weeds are gone, it's amazing how beautiful a place can grow.